So to start, we're going to think about one of the most mystifying lines in the entire Haggadah. The start of the story itself, Arami Oved Avi. Two very different translations are out there for what those three words might mean. On the one end, my father was a wandering Aramaean, which most people believe is speaking of Abraham or Jacob, one of the ancestors of the Jews who lived in Egypt wandering in the desert. But it's just as often translated as an Aramaean destroyed or consumed my father, which could be a reference to Jacob serving for 14 years under the deceitful supervision of Laban. And the stories that we experience in our lives can just in the same way. They can evolve and they can change, and we can understand them differently depending on how we are emphasizing them. So, with all that in mind, uh, how are we thinking about the story of what we lived over this past year, and how has that emphasis possibly shifted along the way for you? And I'll invite Sara to start.
Yeah, so I think that for me, my story narrative has changed, but it also really hasn't changed. I've always really practiced being super mindful every night for the last 3 years. I've kind of written what I've been grateful for in like a gratefulness journal. And so it's more just like the narrative of it has changed. Like last year, I was abroad. It was my last day abroad, actually, like a year ago today. And so I was like trying to do a million things at once. And I was disappointed if I didn't get to do 12 things in a day. And now looking at my journal, it's more, I'm so grateful if I'm able to go on a walk or do something really simple. And those simple things matter way more to me. And it's just kind of making like the most of every single moment. So that's more how my story narrative has changed. But I think that's really comforting to know that the story can change. I think it makes life super exciting, kind of knowing that you always have something that will change or be different. It gives you something to look forward to. And the possibilities are really endless. So that's how my narratives have changed.
Yeah, I think that's definitely such an amazing thing that you brought up there, Sarah, just in terms of, being grateful for such simplistic, very just stable concepts of our life right now. And I think when I think of storytelling and just in connection to these themes of perspective, I don't think about like the stories, but more so how I'm telling the stories. And it kind of reminds me of the concept of how Judaism is such a dualistic, religion, culture, just practice of spirituality and nature, and just how there's so many different perspectives that go into that. And it also just makes me think of the different perspectives that have been taken place in our world today with an election year and with the pandemic, and just many different feelings and thoughts kind of hold these stories and these narratives across the board. And so when I think of storytelling, I think about trying to be like inclusive in my narrative, because there's just so many different perspectives going on right now at its height. And there's a lot of emotional and very heightened perspectives, and just trying to, find grounding and how to navigate that. That's what I think about.
I guess for me, I study religion. So the story of this year has been familiar in so much as that all of our sacred texts have these cataclysmic, apocalyptic sort of scenarios. This year we've seen floods, we've seen fires, there's a global plague, there was civil unrest. A few months ago, locusts descended upon India. I don't know if there's anything more biblical than locusts. And so it does seem familiar in so much as it reflects what our wisdom traditions have talked about for a long time. These events are opportunities for us to reimagine our world anew, to rethink how we act and move in the world. And so I do think this has been a story, a global story that connects us all as humans. But what I'm looking forward to is the birth of the new story. I think our students know that we're not going to go back to the world the way it was, and we shouldn't. We shouldn't go back to structural racism and healthcare inequity. We shouldn't go back to abusing animals and degrading our planet. We shouldn't go back to our screen addictions. We shouldn't go back to the things that got us here, and we've seen the limits of those things. And so for me, whenever we see these kinds of world-shaping, world-defining events in our scriptural traditions, they're opportunities of redemption, renewal, regeneration, And those opportunities are acts of storytelling. And so I hope that our students and all of us feel empowered as one story comes to an end and a new story begins, that we fully be the author of that story.
You know, I love hearing the fact that you all have such different perspectives on it, but they're searching for meaning and turning that meaning into something that really changes lives. And I think that probably, as all the stories are written, if it is that transformation from the original story and now the stories we're telling, that it really means a lot to all of us. For me, some of the pandemic is very much in the real story I've had to deal with, the issues that were top of mind for people. And of course, in the beginning, it was just the speed. How could we make sure people weren't left behind, turn all the classes on a dime, get aid out to people? I mean, it was so built, it was so filled with frenetic decision making. Do it fast, get it right, do it fast. And then we went into the summer with all the incredible cries for justice and equity, and that too required lots of fast decisions, but none of these are really fast decisions. These are such meaningful, deep, they just require us to be so completely invested. And so I think it was a mixture of needing to make decisions and yet wanting so much, yearning to be able to have it really touch real people, hear how people were really feeling. And as we switched then to this period in the pandemic, we have a lot of people that the inequities they haven't caught up to many of us who are now feeling okay, we've got some security, we can see the end of the tunnel. So now my focus is on how do I help and keep us moving for those of us who are ready, and how do we not lose attention on those who have been left behind. But it is an evolving story. But you've just given me such a beautiful feeling from all of you that that story is about caring for people, and how do we keep the realness of it not getting lost in the frenetic and the fast and the decision making, the turmoil and the chaos of it. And that's probably the most important lesson I'm learning and trying to live as we go through it.
No, and I mean, I'm feeling that sense of inspiration from hearing this group reflect, and I'm also feeling all of us cave to the temptation to make meaning and to make this into a story, right? It was like this, and now it's like this, right? And I also want to inject in there, and I heard some of this from Dr. Folt just now. It's not always that simple. Things haven't necessarily moved from fast to slow or from unresolved to resolved. And if there's one other common thread I felt during this, it's the possibility that on a daily basis, you could be in 17 different places throughout the day, or even at the same time. And I think going back to the kind of launching pad of that mysterious piece of text in the Haggadah that means more than one thing, I hope that we've learned from this experience to be more okay feeling more than one way. And that is something, as we think too about what we do in wellness work, that I'm going to be continuing to think about.